This is a Global News special presentation. The content may include material that is disturbing to some viewers.
He fell to the ground and hit his head.
COVID is exacerbate the situation.
Stop spitting at us.
In Chinese.
Stop cursing at us.
From China? We are Canadians, sir.
Pretends to shoot me in the head, basically.
Discriminating against and being spat against.
Kung flu. Kung flu.
Use these terms, China virus, Wuhan virus, and even Kung flu.
Hello. Thanks for joining us for this Global News special on anti-Asian racism in Canada. I'm Tracy Tong.
And I'm Sophie Ludi. Journalists across the country will be joining us to share stories both painful and personal.
We know racism isn't exclusively an Asian experience, but there has been an alarming rise in Asian hate across North America.
While COVID-19 has driven some of that anti-Asian sentiment, it's not the sole cause. Hidden hate has long existed in our country, but this wave of attacks has led to a crisis point and a cry for action.
Over the next half hour, you will hear from NBA veteran Jeremy Lin, former Governor-General Adrienne Clarkson, and Asian-Canadian actor Paul Sun-Hyung Lee. But first, our Miranda Anthistle tells us how we got here.
You don't have to understand what she's saying to hear her pain. Xiao Jianxi is just one of numerous Asian elders violently assaulted in broad daylight, completely unprovoked. Some did not survive. 84-year-old Vicha Ratanapakdi was killed while going for his morning walk. In Atlanta, 6 Asian women were murdered in a targeted attack, police describing the suspect as having a bad day. And from being dismissive to being passive, a 65-year-old Asian woman brutally beaten by a stranger in New York City while security guards do nothing. Stomped on, spat on, murdered. All these incidents happening since the beginning of the global COVID-19 pandemic, and Canada is not immune to the hate.
I heard from behind me him shouting, China, Japan.
Chinese democracy.
There are people out there who don't think I'm human, basically.
Between 2019 and 2020, the number of anti-Asian hate crimes went up significantly in Canada's major cities. Toronto saw an increase of 275%, Ottawa 600%. In Montreal, there was an increase of 633%, while Vancouver saw the highest with a 717% rise in crimes targeting the Asian community.
Go back to China where you came from.
The common thread? Blaming the Asian community for the pandemic.
To have that anger displayed to Asians is really unfair. The enemy is really the virus.
Research done by the Chinese Canadian National Council shows those who reported a racist attack in Cantonese or Mandarin were twice as likely to have experienced a physical assault over those who reported in English.
It's targeted at people who, the racists think are vulnerable and who they think won't fight back.
But the Asian community is standing up. Thousands rallying from coast to coast.
We are human beings. Give us a break. Enough is enough.
A cry.
It is the time for us to be here.
A chorus.
United we stand, together we fight.
A community saying it won't be silent any longer.
That jaw-dropping statistic Miranda mentioned, Vancouver's more than 700% increase in hate crimes, that doesn't even include the suburbs. But in the city known as Canada's gateway to Asia, some people aren't all that surprised.
What kind of things are spray painted or written?
A lot of anti-Asian stuff, a lot of hate, a lot of obscene kind of stuff.
Constable Byron Yee has walked the streets of Vancouver's Chinatown for years, first as a kid, now as a VPD officer, seeing firsthand the alarming spike in racism since the pandemic began and causing concern for his own family's safety.
I didn't worry about my dad coming out here, but ever since COVID hit, I do worry about him coming out here a lot more now.
BC has had the most anti-Asian hate crimes per capita in North America. Tracy Ling was one of those targeted by a man who made racist comments and spat in her face.
I remember thinking to myself, being so angry afterward, that I was like, he spat on the wrong person. That was how it went through my mind when I was so angry, knowing that this have happened to so many people and that it happened to me too.
What starts with words can escalate, like this assault at a 7-Eleven. Racial slurs hurled at a 92-year-old man with dementia, who was then pushed out of the store and shoved to the ground.
Many, in particular seniors in the Chinese community, are more worried about going out and walking and being assaulted than they are even about catching COVID. Now, to me, that's shocking, and it's infuriating.
Metro Vancouver is often thought of as Canada's most Asian city, but the sharp rise in incidents has revealed a racist undercurrent some say has always been here.
I think that it's been a riptide that has shaped this city. COVID is, of course, the latest issue to come in that age, but I think prior to this, you can imagine that it's the issue of housing and residential real estate mixed in with the economy and jobs.
The pandemic brought it back to the surface, but the concern is anti-Asian sentiment will remain even after COVID is gone.
We have to speak up. We have to take up space, because this is not something that we can just minimize anymore, because it's actually killing people.
I can name Kung Flu. I can name...
Donald Trump may have popularized this Kung Flu rhetoric, but he hasn't been the only one saying it. On this side of the border, the once conservative, now independent member of parliament, Derek Sloan, posted a video early on in the pandemic. In it, he questions the loyalty of Canada's top doctor, Theresa Tam.
Theresa Tam, we sent an email out today asking, does she work for Canada or for China?
Sloan was slammed for it, but he refused to apologize. And then there was this in early April. A councillor from Essex, Ontario, posted this tweet saying he tested positive for the Chinese flu.
Other Asian Canadian public officials across the country have faced hateful messages too, in their inboxes and sometimes face-to-face. In BC, MLA Ann Kang was yelled at outside her constituency office and told Asian women don't belong in government. MLA Bowen Ma keeps a record of the many comments that come her way, some demanding proof that she's not a communist, others perpetuating that wet market trope about Chinese food. We all know these attacks aren't right, but racism isn't a crime on its own, and many racist acts don't carry real consequences.
That's right, and here's a stat for you. From 2013 to 2018, 82% of hate crimes reported to police in Canada did not result in any charge. Now, this has led to major underreporting from the Asian community, with victims thinking, what's the point? Our Tracy Nagai explains why hate crime data doesn't show the true scope of anti-Asian attacks.
Hackers bombarding an online meeting for young people, including children, with vile comments.
They started spamming the chat with racial slurs, such as, go back to China, you belong in sweatshops.
While deeply disturbing, attacks like these are not necessarily illegal. 3 sections of the criminal code define hate crimes, including hate propaganda advocating genocide, public incitement or promotion of hatred and mischief related to certain property. But lawyers say meeting the definition for a hate crime under the law can be difficult.
The section requires that the conduct that promotes this racial hatred has to be willful, so intentional. You have to deliberately do this for this purpose.
It doesn't mean that the crimes will go unpunished, but it has in part led to underreporting from the Asian community.
A lot of times is the fear, and number 2 is the unknown whether the police will take it seriously. So I'm here to tell and speak with the public and say we take these things very seriously.
And what has kept the issue largely invisible is a lack of data. Canada's largest municipal police service admits while it does track hate crimes, it doesn't collect figures on other crimes that may be racially motivated.
Even though a racism is not a crime, should we be capturing those as a database for us to reference that down the line, then this is something that we're seriously considering.
Until then, advocates say silence is not the solution.
We are providing a voice for those who can't speak up, because by staying silent, we are sending the message that it's our right for them to keep on doing these actions.
In hopes that speaking up will one day bring justice.
Canine cologne.
Up next, how Hollywood sees us.
The donga need food.
The stereotypes that separate us, and why the punchlines just aren't funny anymore.
When I look at anti-Asian things in Canada, I think of the larger picture.
Former Governor-General Adrienne Clarkson reflects on her family's place in Canada's problematic past.
The surge in violent incidents has forced more people to sit up and take notice of anti-Asian hate. But racism isn't always so overt. Sometimes it's considered entertainment. As Liem explains, Asian stereotypes have long been a Hollywood go-to.
Why do Chinese girls taste different from all other girls?
Darling, I give you very best duck.
Exotic?
I will bring desolation.
Villainous? A joke. This is what happens when film and television use stereotypes to simplify Asian identity. Back in the 1950s and 60s, white actors like Marlon Brando and Mickey Rooney would play Asian caricatures. Off-screen, the model minority myth took hold, suggesting all Asians were inherently smart, successful, and submissive.
When you grow up in a society where you don't see yourself reflected on the screens, you don't really think much of it because you kind of go, well, yeah, it figures. But what you're taught subliminally is that your stories don't matter.
Why is it important to have proper representation in pop culture?
Media is so powerful in the sense that it really does shape a society. For a generation, you had people who were raised to believe that Asians were the other, that it's okay to make fun of them, that they often are very odd or very funny, and it made it socially acceptable to laugh at an entire race or entire group of people.
여보, what's Netflix and that chill?
Sex.
How you know that?
Paul Sun-Hyung Lee is a Korean-Canadian success story, best known as Appa on Kim's Convenience and Captain Carson Teva in The Mandalorian. And like many in the community, the rise of anti-Asian hate has left him upset and angry.
It's heartbreaking, it's shocking, it's devastating. It makes you wonder why. You shouldn't have to say, don't perpetuate acts of violence against people, against Asian people. I'm afraid for my parents, I'm afraid for my kids. What's gonna happen to them? I mean, basically what's being shown is it's open season.
Stop Asian hate! Stop stereotyping us!
Mortal Kombat star Ludi took a stand last month at the rally on the steps of the Vancouver Art Gallery.
I know that the first Asians came over 400 years ago to North America, and they were commissioned to build boats. So the first thing I said was, we came over here not to break, but to build. We did that, but I felt that we were unheard. We can't forget about this. We need to keep talking nonstop. We need to talk tirelessly and then act on it.
Asian representation in media has improved considerably in recent years. Crazy Rich Asians made $238 million US in 2018. 2 years later, Steven Yeun is making history as the first Asian American to be nominated at the Oscars for Best Actor. And this fall, Kim's Convenience star Simu Liu is making his debut as the Marvel superhero Shang-Chi.
I think what we're all looking for is actual measurable successes and the doors opening and that happening so that we can set our communities up to succeed. Grow as an industry, grow as a society, grow as a culture to do all that so that all the stories are told and that everybody has a place at the table.
From Hollywood to history, Canada actually has a storied past of anti-Asian racism, one the government has worked to rectify.
And to take us through that journey, we called on the first visible minority ever to be appointed Governor-General. The Right Honorable Adrienne Clarkson has a remarkable story of her own, of overcoming and belonging after arriving in Canada in 1942 as a refugee.
We thought we were very settled in Hong Kong, and unfortunately the war happened. We were thrown out. We got on a Red Cross ship. We were taken to Canada because my father was a relatively successful young businessman, and he had done work with the Canadian Trade Commission. And we were treated as in a way, different, but very well. And yes, there was the occasional thing where people would say, "Chinky, chinky Chinaman" to you, but my father said, you know, those are silly things that people do because they don't know any better. I think it was just racism. They're yellow people with little slit eyes, and they have awful habits like smoking opium and binding ladies' feet. We had a very good experience. So when I look at anti-Asian things in Canada, I think of the larger picture. The 1923 legislation, which is anti-Chinese, the kind of stuff that you would read about the yellow peril. The Chinese Exclusion Act, it came with a head tax. I don't know what the act actually was, but it was a barrier to entry which was economic, which is you had to pay a certain amount of money in order to come into Canada to work. And I was listed there as Adrienne Poi, 9 years old, which I was at the time. Certain parts of the country became much more exclusionary than others. British Columbia is, and it was known in China. Well, the Japanese, basically, they were very prosperous on the West Coast. And after Pearl Harbor, people were very, very anxious. The Japanese were dispossessed of everything and had to live in terrible conditions in the interior of BC. And then after the war, they were forbidden to go back to BC within 100 miles of the coast. I think what's wonderful about Canada is that it's capable of change. People don't necessarily love each other. You know, all you need is love. I don't believe that. All you need is people to understand that you are a human being and they are a human being, and you may not like them, you may not want to stand in the bus shelter with them, but they have every right to life in this country as you do. Every single right as you do.
Coming up, rising above the racism.
I was a little bit like, whoa, what just happened?
NBA veteran Jeremy Lin talks about breaking down barriers on and off the court. Plus,
knocked on my window and started to yell at me for the way that I was driving and asked whether I had learned how to drive in China.
Canadians from coast to coast open up about their lived experiences.
So for 2 years, I was a waitress, and my manager, whenever he'd see me, he'd say, "Ching ching chong," like that. And at the time, I would just laugh along with him.
A woman came in and verbally abused me. She told me her views about the onset of the pandemic, about Wuhan, and about Asian people. She accused me of being the problem, and her ultimate solution was to get rid of us, to send us all home. I'm Canadian. I was born here.
As a kid, chink and Chinese chicken were the popular names at school, in summer camp, and yes, that Bare Naked Lady song did not help. Overseas in France in 2016, I even got this and cheap chink thrown at me. Did I ever defend myself then? Not really, because I didn't know how to. But I did last year when I was called out a couple times in grocery stores for the reason people had to wear masks and live in fear.
It's not always easy to open up about uncomfortable experiences.
And one of the only Asian Americans ever to play in the NBA tells us he only recently found his voice.
Sensational play from Jeremy Lin. 8 points and 9 rebounds, and Lin.
Honestly, I couldn't think of a better city to be able to bring a championship to.
Lin's sanity launched him into stardom almost 10 years ago, and Jeremy Lin has continued to break down barriers. He became the first Asian American NBA champion with the Toronto Raptors in 2019, and amid the wave of violent attacks against his community, he decided to finally speak up.
Over the last couple of weeks, we've really seen you use your platform and your voice to address a lot of the atrocities that we've been seeing across North America. How have you been feeling? Because I know it must be emotionally exhausting too.
Yeah, you know, I think especially when everything happened in Atlanta, that was really heavy. And that was a couple of days in terms of conversations and a lot of things and just processing. So I kind of evolved from a place of like feeling really unsure and surprised and sad and angry to a place of really believing and hoping and knowing that, you know, the work that everybody's doing is making a difference.
You've come out and spoken about some of your experiences on the court, including a recent incident being called coronavirus on the court.
Yeah, to be completely honest, you know, it was in the heat of the game, and it was in the middle of the game, and then I've been called far worse. And so it kind of, honestly, just kind of slipped off my shoulder in terms of just like, I was a little bit like, whoa, what just happened? Oh, okay. But, you know, I think that comes from maybe, you know, being called a chink and Chinese import, and can you see the scoreboard with those, you know, slanty eyes and stuff like that. Like, I've heard a lot of things through the years, and it's been something that I've grown up with. And so by now I kind of have my ways of coping with things.
A way of coping with things for a lot of people has been to not talk about it and to brush it off and laugh it off. I think through these conversations, a lot of people have been realizing that this is not okay and that it's been built up and we've gotten to this point now.
You know, not talking about it is definitely not the answer, especially now. We're seeing so many studies about mental health and what people are going through. This is something that everybody has to deal with, and a lot of Asians and Asian Americans are really, really scared right now.
I want to ask you about your time with the Raptors. You've broken a lot of barriers, and being the first Asian American to win an NBA championship. We get to wear that pride. Thank you for that with the Toronto Raptors. Your time here, did you ever feel any of that? And was it different on this side of the border?
My time in Toronto was amazing. I didn't feel any discrimination when I was playing in Toronto. It was such a diverse city, and it just felt like a melting pot. And there was just so many different cultures. One thing that I have been thinking a lot about recently is the fact that when we talk about the violence and the things that we're seeing and the discrimination and the racism across North America, we're seeing them in a lot of actually diverse metropolitan type cities.
You're bringing up a really good point there, because I think a lot of people see Canada and a lot of these big cities in Canada, like Vancouver and like Toronto, as really diverse and accepting places. But the facts and the stats that are coming out of these places over the last while too have been pretty alarming. Where do we go from here?
We have seen an incredible, like I'm saying, intense mobilization of Asian influencers, Asian celebrities, or people, prominent people in the Asian circle that are mobilized to try to figure out what can we do, how can we help, how can we use our platforms, how can we speak up. Having said that, are we going to change everybody's viewpoint, or is everyone going to be listening? No, but more people are, and I genuinely believe that, and I think that's a great place to start.
Well, this special is just a start for us too. We'll continue digging into the issues and sharing on our platforms.
And as we head into Asian Heritage Month, we want to leave you with this final thought. We've focused this show on racism against the East Asian community. But of course, we're not alone. We know very well that people of all colors face bigotry and hatred every single day.
Racism hurts our entire society, and that means it is everybody's fight. We have to stand up with each other and for each other. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you again soon.
This has been a special presentation from Global News.